So as you see, we've made a dam out of tuck tape because we had these annoying voids. If you remember back a couple of years, we kerfed this with a table saw. Previous boats I've kerfed it with a bandsaw, but a bandsaw cut, at least when I'm running the bandsaw, is never completely straight. So we use the table saw. We got a straight cut, but at the end we get these annoying voids. So future boats, lesson learned. I mean, it's a beautiful fit here, but there's a gap there just because of the width of the kerf. So lesson learned, future boats, completely cut into three pieces. No sort of finger arrangement here to release it or to avoid this in future. So we've just created a dam because we've poured on the glue here. So and you can see bubbles, right? So it's obviously doing its thing. The glue is finding the lowest point in there, filling up those annoying voids, which, given the size they are, there's no structural implication, but it's unsightly, and there's a chance that a bit of water gets in there, causes a bit of rot, and in a certain amount of time we have to make a new set of gunwales, right? So we've glued it. As you can see, we've clamped it to death with these cross balls to hold everything precisely in alignment until this glue cures. So we're going to lift this off the sawhorses, place it carefully on the floor, propped up by 2x4s to keep it, because right now it's I'm not going to say perfect, but it's in one plane, right, horizontal plane. So we're going to lay it down very carefully on the floor, propped up, kept clear of the floor by the 2x4s, just because of the thicknesses of the clamps there. Let it cure overnight. Tomorrow morning I'll get up early, I'll check the glue, and I'll give it the proud bits where it's pooling. I'll give it a scrape down because it'll be cured but not completely cured. It won't be rock hard, and it'll be easier to work with hand tools. And then after 24 hours, we can pop the clamps and carry on with the next stage of the operation. Hey, we're back at it. During the week, I carefully released the clamps on the two gunwale frames, and fortunately they weren't stuck together because that would be heartbreaking. So we isolated them nicely. So pulled them apart and then immediately clamped the frame back in place like this with a couple of cross balls. The reason why is, in my experience at least, epoxy is tremendously strong, stronger than the wood actually, in tension and compression, although compression really is an issue, but it's comparatively weak in shear. So we keep these, we maintain these, we keep these in place so that this doesn't pop apart like a wishbone, like a Thanksgiving wishbone. And so what I did was, just to reinforce that, I drilled a couple of holes and I drove in a couple of these pegs that we see. You get these from Lee Valley. They're hardwood, and they're compressed, as you can see, with a pattern of almost like rifling. And the idea being that you can spread glue on these things, and the pattern of ridges and depressions means that the glue isn't scraped off the peg when you drive it into the hole. The valleys, as it were, the lands or the grooves, I should say, carry the glue into the hole. So I tapped I tapped two into the holes, and the glue, because these are dried and kept dry, the glue swells the wood, so these lock tight. So they are holding, they're greatly assisting the strength of this joint because they're strong in shear, whereas the glue is a little less so. The glue is still stronger than the wood, but there we go. This will become less critical when this is installed in the boat and the stem piece is in place, which will give it additional support. So we're gonna clean up. We're gonna saw these flush. We're gonna clean up all of these glue joints. We're going to clean up and then rough cut the two shoulders that we glued up out of the ash blocks. We're gonna do a dry fit up the bow, the two bow pieces, and that might take us to the end of. So yeah, we're gonna clean up the glue run out on these two blocks that we glued up. Clean the four sides, just a couple of passes with the planer, I think. And then we're gonna trace our template. Got a couple of them. Trace the template onto the block. I'll have to tune up the bandsaw because historically, this would be done with great skill with an axe, done freehand with an axe, and then chisels and such like that. I no longer, you have to be practicing constantly with an axe to have that skill, and I no longer have that skill. There'd definitely be a learning curve of ruining 2 or 3 of these to get my hand back in. So we're going to tune up the bandsaw that to shape, and then comes the period of dry fitting the 2 bow pieces together. The bottom one's dry fitted. It's good to go. We just have to make sure it's correctly aligned before we spin the bolts tight. But it'll be a matter of, frankly, a slightly tedious and a slightly frustrating cut and fit until we get the relationship that we want. Then we drill and fasten the shoulders. Then we do the end blocks, the spacer blocks. And again, just a bit of fiddling about with it, which is tedious and frustrating, only because once this final bit of fiddling about is done, the pace immediately picks up because we steam the ribs in one session. We install the stringers. Ideally, you go right from ribs to installing the stringers so that the stringers will fine-tune the hull. So this is the last of the fiddly annoying part before it gets seriously fun again. Okay, so we've cleaned up the joints and the epoxy on the top bow gunnel, and now I'm tracing out the shoulders, which and I'm using a pattern that I made after the last boat that I made. There's a couple of patterns up here. This angle, because this is, imagine that this is the main part of the gunnels, and that this angle of the bow gunnel is decided by a number of factors. In this case, we're using basically salt, same as last time, because this particular angle over the last 3 or 4 Curraughs that I've built has shown to be absolutely suitable for every weather condition we've taken it out in. And we've taken it out in some pretty, each of those boats in some pretty lumpy water. If building right from scratch, a Curragh builder would ask the intended owner, like, what do you intend to use this boat for? Is it going to be racing? Is it going to be fishing? Is it going to be long distance, and what? And from his experience, both of boat building and of the handling of these boats on the local waters, he would determine the angle, because the local sea conditions will produce a local boat, right? So you'll see boats from different parts of the Irish coast, sometimes with, I think it's Mayo, an extremely high bow to counter the seas that they deal with there. But we're going to go with this angle, which has proved itself to be absolutely suitable for local water conditions. So, and lacking a heavy piece of wood, we've glued 2 pieces of ash together, and I'm just laying out the template on the stock so that the upper edge of the template is parallel to the upper edge of the stock, and the lower one, the bottom of the rabbet here, just comes to, or rebate, comes to the lower edge. And I'm just going to hold it and carefully mark it so that the template doesn't move relative to the stock. And then, were I my mentor or any of who's gone before him, I'd be cutting out the shape with a very sharp axe. But you have to practice all the time with an axe to be good with an axe. And I haven't chopped, I haven't hewn with an axe for quite some time. And rather, I won't say waste, although waste is the technical term as you're bringing it down to the line. I won't invest in the amount of wood that I would have to ruin to bring my skills up to scratch. So we're going to pop this on the bandsaw. I've spent some time changing the blade and properly tuning up the bandsaw so we get an accurate cut as possible. But even so, I'm going to be cutting a bit wide of the line, and then we'll dress down to the line using a plane. And this again is sort of a cut and try until we get the fit that we consider suitable. There we go. So we'd spent a bit of time, because remember we were going to cut out the shoulders, so we spent some time tuning up the bandsaw. We changed the blades. We had to remove and then reattach the pulley on the motor. And then after that, even a new bandsaw blade wasn't cutting this ash. At one point, I turned off the saw and looked at the blade to make sure it wasn't upside down or backwards, because it wasn't cutting it satisfactorily. So we've just gone back, we've clamped the work to the bench, and we're just doing, as you can see, Marcel's doing a number of relieving cuts, is what I choose to call them. About, looking down here, you can see eventually about every inch or so. And then we're just going to chop those out with a chisel and then plane smooth, because these hand saws are cutting vastly more quickly, twice as quick, 3 times more quickly than the expensive power saw was. So there's maybe a bit of a lesson there. I don't know, but we're going to carry on like this. And frankly, it's much more satisfying to work with a tool where you don't have to wear ear defenders and eye defenders and stuff like that. So I'm going to put this down and get back to sawing.